Hi there, this is Ms. Caitlin from Vivo Kids Art Academy and welcome to another December Daily Draw. Today we are going to be making a drawing for day 29 and our theme is mountains today. Now we are going to be using a bit of watercolor to create a loose watercolor sketch of some mountains with atmospheric perspective. So the kind of paper you might want to use for our daily draw today is a thick piece of paper, one that's made for mixed media, or even a piece of just watercolor paper will do fine. So go ahead and grab that and we can go ahead and get started. So here is my piece of paper today. Let's start off by writing the number at the top. Now I want you to do all of these drawings with pencil first, but you're going to actually see me use a marker today to draw. And this is just so that you can see my lines. So go towards the top of your paper, make sure that it's turned vertical, up and down, and go ahead and draw that box for our number. So again, I want you to be using a pencil to draw all of these steps first. And we're going to write 29. Now you can make this number as fancy as you like. You can add different designs to it. You can make some parts bold, some parts thin, and have fun experimenting with line width. So there's my number. Now we're almost kind of making a landscape today where we have these trees. It's as if we're kind of like a bird flying above into the mountains. So we're going to see the tops of these trees very up close. They're kind of in the foreground for us. Then we're going to have a mountain that's about in the medium ground. And then we're going to have some mountains that are just in the background. They're very far away. And with atmospheric perspective, the farther away something gets, it's going to appear lighter, like in color. And it's also going to appear a little bit fuzzier because as we kind of look out towards the distance, out towards the horizon, or just out towards anything that's far away from us, the air and the atmosphere of the earth kind of starts to muddy that a little bit. Things start to look lighter and a little fuzzy, a little hazy. So things that are going to appear closer to us, like the trees today, are going to be very defined. Now, we're not going to draw whole entire trees. We're really only going to see the top half of them. So I want you to take your pencil and we're going to practice a tree right here down below. So when things are closer to us, not only are they well defined with atmospheric perspective, they're also going to appear lower on our paper. Now for our trees, we're kind of making pine trees today. I'm going to start by drawing a curved line down and a curved line down. So it's almost like we made a V, but instead of doing straight lines, we've done curved lines. Now you can kind of make it a little stylized today if you'd like. You can either do a pointed line here, or you can do a curved line in and a curved line in. You can even add a little curve right here to show some different pine needles. Then you're going to go underneath and draw two more curved lines out. Two more curved lines in. This time they're a little bigger. You can again draw some curved lines inside to help with that tree texture. And then draw two more curved lines out. Now, you might make it all the way to the bottom of your paper so you don't have to draw more curved lines, but this is kind of the look we want for our trees. So for our trees, again, I'll show you our example. We kind of want them to go in this diagonal space on the lower left-hand corner of our piece today. So you can have a lot of fun adding in trees as you desire. Just know that you kind of want to vary it up a little bit. You don't want all the trees to be the same size, and you don't want all the trees to be the same height. Because in nature, even though sometimes they look like they're all really similar, trees are very different from one another. You can even do some overlapping, put trees behind other trees. So if I have a tree and its leaves or its pine needles are going to come out, maybe I'm not going to see all the ones that are behind this one, this tree here. So just have fun adding in trees in this lower left-hand corner. Again, you may not be able to see all of the different edges of the trees, kind of like this one right here. And as you start to move back as well, start to make some of those trees a little bit smaller because now they're inching a little bit more towards the midground and the background. So as things get smaller, or as things get farther away from us, they're going to start moving up on the paper as well as start to get smaller. Now, of course, we're about to draw a really big mountain, so mountains are kind of the exception, but even though mountains are really big and we're going to be drawing them really big today, they still would appear smaller if we were farther away from them. It's just for our picture, these mountains are kind of close. All right, once you've finished adding in your trees, remember you want them all along this lower left-hand corner. We're gonna go ahead and add in our mountain in the midground. Now this mountain shape, you can really do any kind of organic line that you want. It doesn't need to be a straight line or a jagged line, but this is kind of how I like to do it. So mountains, they're very rocky, or sometimes they're very, very rocky. So I'm gonna start here about on the middle of my paper, and I'm going to add in just kind of a wavy, almost jagged-like line. I can have it kind of come down like that. And so that'll be one part of the mountain that's maybe a little bit closer to us, but still, way far out there. Now, last we have the part of the mountain that's way in the background. It's really the biggest chunk of the mountain. I'll show it to you again. So we're gonna draw this part right here. Now you can have fun kind of experimenting with the mountain shape if you like, but I have 2 peaks of the mountain here. So that's what I'm going to draw. Now the trick to making it look a little bit more natural is not to do straight lines. It is to add in some of those jagged edges into the shape. So go ahead and take your pencil and add in your large mountain into the background. Remember, if you want it to look a little bit more realistic, add in some little edges here and there to make it more organic, more natural. Now you can also go ahead and add in a moon or a sun. Have the drawing for our daily draw. Now you can go ahead and outline this with either some water-soluble markers. You could outline this with regular markers that aren't water-soluble, so like a Prismacolor or a Copic marker. You could also outline this with colored pencils today. You could do this with Sharpie as well, but for our sketch today, we're kind of all right if some of the marker bleeds away a little bit, but not too much, so just be careful with that. I'm going to go ahead and right now fill in my number with the same color. Now, if you need a second to pause the video and just get everything outlined, please feel free to do so. I would encourage you to think about how outlining things will work for your atmospheric perspective. So for example, again, looking at our piece here, I have kind of a pretty thick outline on the trees, but you can see as I move back, my outline becomes lighter and lighter and lighter because I, again, am trying to remember as things get farther away from me with atmospheric perspective, they become lighter and fuzzier. So just keep that in mind as you begin to outline. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and dive into the watercolor sketch part of it. We're gonna do some very loose watercolor techniques today. If you are not quite ready for that, you can just pause the video and you can continue or resume once you're ready. Now I have my watercolors right over here. I'm gonna move the palette over. And I have my bucket off to the side just so that I have some space. And I'm going to fill in the trees first. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my medium brush first, get that nice and wet, wipe off any extra water, and I'm going to start with a dark green, or just any green that I really like that's going to be perfect for my pine trees here. So you can decide what that's going to be for you. And I'm just going to take this and do some strokes onto the tree, being very careful not to go outside my marker lines. You can see I'm not too worried about my strokes. I'm actually pretty okay if I can see some of my brush strokes, but the goal is we want it all to be very solid in the end, especially for this part that's closest to us in the foreground. Now you can do maybe a little bit of wet into wet in the tree, or if you want to kind of follow the natural lines that you created here, this is what I like to do. I'll take my watercolor of choice, and then I'll kind of concentrate at the top of the tree, most of that color, and then drag it down as I get towards the end of one section. Then underneath here, this new section of the tree, I'll add more of that watercolor. So I'll use more paint, less water, and again, just kind of pull that color down. So I'm almost shading as I go. Again, our watercolor is just supposed to be loose today, but we still want to think about all of the things that would make this landscape, this kind of winter scene, look a little more realistic and almost give an implied texture. So when we're adding texture into something, sometimes we don't have to add in every single little detail. The best example that I have for this is actually when you're drawing your hair. For beginners, the biggest mistake that you might make is actually trying to draw every single individual little hair. And that's actually not really your goal. What you want to try and do is figure out, well, what are the big chunks of hair? What are the big spaces that I need to fill in that would make this look realistic? And then you can add in maybe a couple strands here and there to sort of make that implied that this whole area is filled up with little itty bitty strands. So we're kind of doing something similar here with the pine needles on all of these little pine trees. So I want us to think first about the shape, which we have drawn. And then we're going to think about, well, where are we going to find the greatest concentration, the greatest amount of those pine needles? And it's going to be towards either the bottom when these like pine needle sections change, these areas underneath here, or towards the top. So you can see even with the water-soluble marker, like Crayola, I'm still able to keep some of that definition, but this is only because I'm being very careful with how much water I have on my brush. So I don't want my brush to be soaking wet when I go in to add the color. Otherwise, it's just going to turn into a blob. So for this daily draw, I really want you to pay close attention and balance how much water and how much of the color you have on your brush in order to create this piece. Okay, so I'm again just kind of trailing that color underneath here. And then I'm actually going to switch to my larger brush just to go a little faster so you can see what this looks like. I'm going to take again that color, I'm going to work on these trees here. Still doing the same thing, but just working with a larger brush. Now, if you feel more comfortable using a medium-sized brush or half-inch brush, please continue to do so. I just feel comfortable using the large brush, but no pressure for you if you are comfy using that smaller brush. Definitely try and use either a 3/4 inch brush, so that's what this is. It's 3/4 of an inch, or a half-inch brush, and try not to use anything smaller than that. Otherwise, it might take you a while to do this watercolor sketch that we're making here today. All right, so all the trees are very loosely filled in. Now let's go ahead and add in just a little bit more detail so that they can really stand out. First, what I want us to do is I want us to make the trees that are closest to us in the foreground to be a little bit darker. So to do that, I want you to take blue, a nice dark blue, and I want you to just very loosely, using kind of up and down strokes, add that in to only the trees that are closest to you. So maybe it's these trees for you. It's definitely these trees for me. This way we're creating a little more of that texture. We don't have to draw or paint in each individual little pine needle, but by doing our strokes in this vertical fashion, we're kind of implying that this is what they're made out of. Add that in. You can, of course, add in different kinds of greens into your trees. You could use this yellow green, which is a lighter version of green, for maybe some of the trees like into the background as they get a little closer to that midground background area. Again, using those vertical strokes and being mindful. Now I actually want this tree in the front here to be quite dark in comparison to the rest of the trees, so that we really get a good contrast, a difference between light and dark, and all the colors, and the overall picture. So I'm being very careful because, again, we're using lots of watercolor for this little sketch here. We don't want our paper to tear. If you notice that your paper is about to tear or it's crumbling a little bit, that means that, hey, maybe we should just leave that space be for a little while and come back to it later, so that way it doesn't tear on us. So again, being mindful is super important when you're using your watercolor. Just really listening to your paper and seeing what it needs. All right, so I have this here. I'm going to go ahead and just add in a couple more strokes. Again, being super loose with it. All right, as I start to move back into some of these other trees, I'm still gonna add some of that blue, but I'm not gonna be as heavy-handed about it. I'm gonna kind of just add it in little by little. I'm not gonna add it in as much as I did into these ones, these two trees right here in the front. So just keep on working, kind of adjusting as you go. Now, for some of the trees, as I get towards the bottom here, or they start to almost go towards the bottom of the tree area, more towards the trunk, I might fill those spaces in a little bit darker, just because no sunlight can really get to those bottom parts, or they won't get to those bottom parts as quickly or as strong. So I might darken those up a little bit. Again, just very carefully working around, doing those vertical strokes. You can see sometimes, depending on where your watercolor has been placed, some of those strokes are going to start blending together and almost doing the work for you. Kind of doing a little bit of regular watercolor and wet into wet today. All right, definitely for these trees here, I'm going to add just a little bit of the blue, but maybe for the shadows, if I want to make those stand out a little more, I might just switch back to the dark green. Okay. Yes, definitely for these back trees here, I'm just going to switch now to the dark green again and add in the texture that way. As I get close to where they all start gathering up, I'm going to add some green into those areas to make it dark. Definitely, I can't forget about this little tree down here in the corner. Okay, so we've got the trees all filled in. They're very defined, they've got lots of texture on them, and they're very dark. Now what I want us to do is work on our mid-ground. So that's going to be where this other kind of middle mountain is going to be. Now you can feel free to leave white space to show snow on the mountain. We can kind of just use the white of our paper for that. So go ahead and take a brush. It can be your medium brush or your larger brush. And we're going to pick up a little bit of blue. Not a lot, just a little. You're going to want more water on your brush than paint. Just be mindful that it's not dripping wet. And you can do some very careful strokes to fill in parts of the mountain. Now what I'm doing to add some texture, and again to make this very atmospheric, very light, very hazy, is instead of doing up and down strokes like this, I'm almost doing strokes in a C shape. Now I'm not scrubbing the paper, I'm kind of picking up each time. So doing a little C-shaped stroke. Now what you can do is you can kind of bring that up a little bit. Be careful as you get in between the trees, because remember, we've done this, at least I've done this with a water-soluble marker, so I don't want to lose that definition. But I definitely don't want to just leave those spaces blank. So don't be afraid to get right up next to your trees. Kind of just adding in a couple spots here and there. Just a little bit of the blue on my brush. And there we have it. So that's the medium ground. Now you can see that is way lighter than what we've done here in our foreground, but we start to get a little bit lighter into the background. So we're going to go ahead and work on these back mountains here. Now we definitely want these to be very, very light, very fluffy, well not fluffy, very like hazy and atmospheric. So I would recommend getting your brush nice and wet. Again, wipe off any extra water. Pick up maybe a lighter blue. I'm actually going to switch blues now. I have like this regular blue here. I have an aqua color here. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that aqua color. And my goal here is to not completely fill in this mountain. In fact, I'll show you what this looks like on our example again. So you can see I add a lot of this kind of aqua color where I want the snow to be defined. And then in some of these places, I just kind of leave the white of the paper and let the watercolor do its thing. You can also see I add in more of the aqua as I go close to the medium mountain area, just so that way the snow that we've added in stands out. So go ahead and take your brush. Let's first work on the snowy area that we want to emphasize. Again, just doing short little strokes. If you accidentally add maybe too much of the blue, that's all right. Just spread it out. So I've added quite a bit here just so that you can see that you can spread this out no problem. You can see I haven't even gone to refill my brush. Just working with the water that is on the paper and on the brush, and it'll still be fine. Okay. So now we've kind of defined where we want our snow to be. Let's go ahead and just redefine this area right here. So I'm going to get my brush nice and wet, wipe off the extra water, barely pick up any of that blue. Still doing my little short C-shaped strokes. I'm going to get right up next to that edge and just add in the watercolor. So that way you can see that really helps the medium area stand out. And this way, by doing the little strokes, we still get that atmospheric, hazy look. You can continue kind of playing with this a little bit. Just remember, you really want to keep this mountain area that's in our background very light, very airy. I'm going to go ahead and just spread out a little bit of that color here. And we can call this area done. Now last but not least, you can choose to leave this part blank or you can fill it in. We're going to do just a little bit of the sky. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my blue color I was using before, which is this kind of darkish blue. I'm going to pick some of that up with my brush. I'm just going to lightly add in just a little bit. Not to fill it in completely, but just to kind of give the impression of the fact that there is a sky. It's cold, that's why we're using a majority of blue today and cool colors. And kind of work around these areas here. So I'm kind of working in C shapes instead of long brush strokes. Again, kind of going up next to the edge of the mountain. If you want to kind of define the edge of the mountain, you can add a darker line of the blue to help that white of the snow stand out, kind of like this, where I've taken more of the paint on my brush and I'm just kind of adding it close to the edge here. That can be up to you. That might be a little bit of a challenge. All right, so there is today's daily draw. Our watercolor sketch is complete. So be sure to share it with us on our Phoebo Village Facebook page. I would love to see what you created, and we will see you again tomorrow for another December daily draw. Bye for now and see you tomorrow.